One of the most surprising claims floating around online is the idea that Potiphar, the Egyptian official who bought Joseph as a slave, changed his gender or was a eunuch. This theory has caught the attention of many, but when we look closely at the Bible and historical context, it quickly falls apart. The confusion likely comes from a mix-up between two completely different characters in the book of Genesis: Potiphar, who appears in Genesis 39, and Potiphar, mentioned in Genesis 41-45. Potiphar is the captain of Pharaoh's guard, the man who purchased Joseph and placed him in charge of his household. On the other hand, Potiphar is the priest of On and the father of Asenath, the woman whom Pharaoh gave to Joseph as a wife. Though their names sound similar in English transliteration, these are two distinct individuals, each with a unique role in Joseph's story. There is no biblical or historical evidence that Potiphar changed gender or transitioned into Potiphar. That theory is not supported by Scripture and is considered a modern-day misunderstanding that stems from reading the text without paying close attention to the names, roles, and contexts of each character. Another aspect that contributes to the confusion is the use of the Hebrew word saras to describe Potiphar. In some older Bible translations, saras is rendered as eunuch, which often refers to a castrated man. However, in ancient cultures, especially in royal courts, this term could simply mean a high-ranking official or court officer. Being labeled a saras didn't always mean a man was physically castrated. It could also reflect his political rank or trusted status in the palace. Additionally, the Bible tells us that Potiphar had a wife, someone who played a major role in falsely accusing Joseph. That alone casts serious doubt on the idea that he was a eunuch, as eunuchs were typically not allowed to marry or maintain a household in Egyptian society. It's important when studying the Bible to distinguish between cultural assumptions, translation quirks, and what the text actually says. The idea that Potiphar changed gender or identity is not found in the Bible and likely results from a misreading or confusion between names. Understanding this clears up a lot of unnecessary mystery and helps us stay focused on the true message of the story: Joseph's integrity, God's providence, and the triumph of faith under pressure. One of the most debated aspects of Potiphar's identity is the term used to describe him in Genesis 39:1. In the original Hebrew text, Potiphar is called a saras, a word that has led to a lot of confusion and speculation. In some Bible translations, saras is translated as eunuch, a term that usually refers to a castrated man, often someone serving in royal court. But the word saras actually has more than one meaning, and assuming it always means eunuch can be misleading. In the ancient world, especially in Eastern cultures like Babylon and Egypt, a saras could be either a literal eunuch or simply a royal official. The word didn't automatically imply that the person was physically castrated. It could just mean they were a trusted servant or held an administrative role close to the king. That's important, because Potiphar's duties being captain of Pharaoh's guard and managing high-level security and political responsibilities fit perfectly with the broader definition of saras as a powerful and trusted officer. Some Bible translators, especially in older versions like the King James Version, chose to translate saras as eunuch without considering the broader cultural and contextual meaning. This has caused many modern readers to assume Potiphar was a eunuch in the physical sense. But this interpretation doesn't align with what we see in the rest of the story. The Bible clearly tells us that Potiphar had a wife, and she plays a major role in the events that unfold with Joseph. In ancient Egyptian society, eunuchs were rarely allowed to marry, much less maintain a household that included a wife with influence. The fact that Potiphar had a wife who falsely accused Joseph strongly suggests he wasn't a eunuch. His position in society, his household structure, and his authority all indicate that he was a high-ranking official, not someone who had been castrated for court service. That's why many modern Bible translations now choose to interpret saras as official or officer, which better fits the context of Potiphar's role. When we take time to understand the language and culture of the Bible, we can avoid drawing the wrong conclusions. Potiphar's title as a saras does not prove he was a eunuch. It actually shows he was a man of influence and power in Pharaoh's court. By looking at the full picture, we can appreciate the story of Joseph more accurately without being distracted by uncertain theories. Potiphar plays a pivotal role in Joseph's story, and understanding his position and influence helps us grasp the broader narrative of Joseph's life in Egypt. As the captain of Pharaoh's bodyguard, Potiphar was a man of immense power and trust within the Egyptian court. His responsibilities were not only military, but also political, as he had direct access to Pharaoh and played a significant role in the protection of the king and the kingdom. This was no ordinary role. Potiphar held one of the highest positions in the royal court. In Genesis 39, we learn that Potiphar bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites who had brought him to Egypt. But rather than merely being a slave, Joseph quickly proved himself to be more than capable. Potiphar, recognizing Joseph's exceptional abilities and character, placed him in charge of his entire household. This was a position of great responsibility. Joseph wasn't just managing day-to-day chores, but overseeing all of Potiphar's possessions and making important decisions. It was a testament to Joseph's wisdom, trustworthiness, and work ethic that Potiphar entrusted him with so much. What stands out here is the trust Potiphar had in Joseph. Even as a slave, the Bible tells us that everything Joseph touched prospered and Potiphar's household flourished under Joseph's management. Potiphar's success became intertwined with Joseph's integrity and skills, and in turn, Joseph's rise in status reflected the trust God had placed in him. Potiphar's role was crucial in allowing Joseph to rise from a humble slave to a trusted servant with significant authority. Additionally, Potiphar's relationship with Joseph was more than just a master-servant dynamic. Potiphar was evidently impressed by Joseph's character and leadership abilities. In fact, even though Joseph was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, Potiphar did not immediately punish him with death, which was the typical response in cases of such allegations. Instead, Potiphar had Joseph thrown into prison, showing that he still had faith in Joseph's integrity. This detail indicates that Potiphar saw Joseph as a man of value and character, not merely as a slave, despite the false accusations. By understanding Potiphar's position and his relationship with Joseph, we can appreciate how Joseph's journey in Egypt wasn't just about personal hardship, it was also about God positioning him in the right place at the right time. Potiphar, as a key figure in this story, serves as a backdrop to Joseph's integrity, trustworthiness, and eventual rise to power in Egypt. Joseph's story in Potiphar's household is one of the most remarkable examples of perseverance, integrity, and the faithfulness of God in the midst of difficult circumstances. When Joseph was sold into slavery and taken to Egypt, it was a traumatic and uncertain experience. Yet from the very start of his time in Potiphar's house, the Bible tells us that the Lord was with Joseph. And this divine presence turned what could have been a lifetime of hardship into a series of opportunities for growth and success. Rather than succumbing to despair or bitterness, Joseph chose to honor God with everything he did. He worked hard and used the talents he had, and it didn't take long before Potiphar recognized his exceptional qualities. Potiphar saw that Joseph was not just any slave. Joseph was a man of integrity, wisdom, and resourcefulness. These qualities set him apart, and soon, Potiphar entrusted him with the management of his entire household. From overseeing daily chores to making major decisions, Joseph's responsibilities grew, and his reputation for excellence spread. In many ways, Joseph's rise to prominence in Potiphar's household is a lesson about the power of trust and character. Despite being in a foreign land, separated from his family, and in a seemingly hopeless situation, Joseph did not allow his circumstances to define him. Instead, he allowed his actions to reflect his faith in God. It was this faithfulness that turned Potiphar's household into a place of prosperity. The Bible clearly states that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and Potiphar's wealth and success were directly tied to Joseph's management. Joseph's rise, however, was not without its challenges. As he grew in authority, Potiphar's wife took notice of him. Described as a woman who found Joseph attractive, she relentlessly tried to seduce him. But Joseph, displaying incredible character and self-control, refused her advances, stating that such an act would be a great sin against God. This moment of temptation reveals not only Joseph's personal integrity, but also his unwavering commitment to honor God above all else, even at great personal cost. Joseph's rejection of Potiphar's wife's advances ultimately led to false accusations and his imprisonment. But his time in Potiphar's house was not without lasting impact. It was during these early years in Egypt that Joseph's leadership skills were honed and his relationship with God deepened. His journey from slave to steward in Potiphar's house set the stage for his later rise to power in Egypt, where he would go on to become second in command under Pharaoh. Joseph's time in Potiphar's household was not only marked by success, but also by significant temptation and trial. As he gained trust and responsibility, Potiphar's wife, seeing his good looks and integrity, became infatuated with him. The Bible tells us that she frequently tried to seduce Joseph, attempting to lure him into a sinful relationship. Despite the pressure, Joseph's response remained steadfast, showcasing an extraordinary commitment to his morals and his faith. When faced with temptation, Joseph did not waver. He understood the gravity of the situation and the importance of loyalty to both his master and, most importantly, to God. Joseph's refusal to succumb to her advances was rooted in his understanding that such an act would not only betray Potiphar's trust, but also dishonor God. He made it clear to her, saying, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Genesis 39:9. This statement reveals that for Joseph, the issue was not just a matter of avoiding personal consequence, but about maintaining his integrity in the eyes of God. His refusal, however, only escalated the situation. One day, when Potiphar was away, she seized the opportunity to try again, and this time, her persistence turned into force. When Joseph refused to sleep with her, he fled, leaving his cloak behind in her hands. His hasty exit showed immense courage and a clear understanding that sometimes the best response to temptation is simply to run away from it. Furious with rejection and humiliated, Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of attempting to assault her. She used the cloak Joseph left behind as supposed evidence of his crime, and when Potiphar came home, she immediately told him her fabricated story. Potiphar, understandably angry, had Joseph thrown into prison. But what's interesting is that, despite the accusation, he didn't immediately order Joseph's execution. Instead, he chose to have him imprisoned, which suggests that, even in the midst of this crisis, Potiphar still believed in Joseph's character. Though it seemed that Joseph had been abandoned and betrayed, the Bible assures us that the Lord was with Joseph, even in prison. Genesis 39:21. This moment of trial wasn't the end of Joseph's story. Instead, it was a turning point that set the stage for the next chapter in his life. In Potiphar's house, Joseph had learned to manage, lead, and trust God. Now in prison, God would continue to refine him for an even greater purpose. Joseph's story teaches us that integrity, even when tested by temptation or false accusations, can be a powerful witness to God's faithfulness and sovereignty. Joseph's time in prison might seem like a setback, but it was actually another crucial chapter in his journey, one that would prepare him for the remarkable future God had in store. After being falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, Joseph found himself imprisoned, separated from everything he knew and loved. The injustice of the situation could have easily caused him to despair or lose faith. Yet, in the midst of his trials, Joseph remained steadfast, and once again, The Bible tells us that the Lord was with Joseph, Genesis 39:21. Joseph's ability to maintain his faith and trust in God during this time is nothing short of remarkable. Despite being wrongly imprisoned, Joseph did not wallow in self-pity or anger. Instead, he took on a new role as the manager of the prison. Just as he had done in Potiphar's house, Joseph showed his skill and wisdom in organizing the day-to-day operations, earning the respect and trust of the prison warden. The warden, recognizing Joseph's abilities and character, entrusted him with more responsibility, giving him oversight over all the other prisoners. Everything under Joseph's care prospered, even in the bleakest of circumstances. What stands out in Joseph's time in prison is his consistency. No matter where he was, whether in Potiphar's house or a prison cell, Joseph's integrity remained unwavering. He did not let the situation define his character or diminish his work ethic. This perseverance, coupled with his faith in God, was what made him stand out. Joseph wasn't just waiting for something to change. He was actively making the best of every situation, trusting that God had a plan for him, even when it wasn't immediately clear. During his time in prison, Joseph's character was refined further. He encountered two of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, who had been imprisoned. One day, both men shared troubling dreams, and Joseph, ever faithful, saw an opportunity to serve. He offered to interpret their dreams, humbly stating, "Do not interpretations belong to God?" Genesis 48. Even in prison, Joseph knew that his abilities were gifts from God, and he humbly pointed to God as the source of his wisdom. Joseph's interpretation of their dreams, one leading to the restoration of the cupbearer and the other to the baker's execution, came true, but the cupbearer, once freed, forgot about Joseph. For 2 more years, Joseph remained in prison. This delay was yet another test of his patience and faith. Even when forgotten, Joseph remained faithful to God, knowing that his time would come. Joseph's story in prison teaches us that even in the darkest times, God is at work. Our faithfulness and perseverance during trials can prepare us for greater things ahead, as long as we remain trusting and steadfast in his plan. Joseph's journey from prison to becoming the second most powerful man in Egypt is nothing short of extraordinary. After spending years in a foreign land, separated from his family, and enduring false accusations and imprisonment, Joseph's time finally came when Pharaoh had 2 disturbing dreams that no one in his court could interpret. At this critical moment, the cupbearer, who had been restored to his position, remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew prisoner who had accurately interpreted dreams in the past. When Pharaoh summoned Joseph, the young man did not claim credit for interpreting the dreams. Instead, he humbly acknowledged that only God could provide the answers, saying, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Genesis 41:16. Joseph's humility and trust in God's ability to work through him marked a stark contrast to the self-reliance and pride that often characterize leaders in power. This humility, combined with his extraordinary wisdom, impressed Pharaoh deeply. Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams foretold 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine, and he offered a strategic plan to store food during the years of plenty. Pharaoh, recognizing Joseph's wisdom, appointed him as the governor of Egypt, giving him the authority to oversee the nation's preparations for the coming famine. In an instant, Joseph's life transformed from a forgotten prisoner to a man of great power and influence. He was given a new Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, and married Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On, further solidifying his position in Egyptian society. Joseph's rise was not only a testimony to his perseverance and character, but also a clear example of how God's plan can unfold in the most unexpected ways. Every trial, Joseph faced the betrayal by his brothers, the false accusations by Potiphar's wife, and the years of imprisonment was part of a divine process that positioned him exactly where he needed to be. God used every setback as a stepping stone to prepare Joseph for leadership. In our own lives, we can draw a powerful lesson from Joseph's journey. Sometimes we face challenges that seem unfair or insurmountable. We may feel forgotten or abandoned, just as Joseph did in prison when the cupbearer forgot his promise to help him. However, the story of Joseph teaches us that God's timing is always perfect, and our struggles are never in vain. The difficulties we face may be the very things that prepare us for a greater purpose, even when it seems like nothing is moving forward. Just as Joseph's trust in God's plan led him to greatness, we too can trust that even in our darkest times, God is working behind the scenes to fulfill His purpose in our lives. When we stay faithful, humble, and patient, we can believe that, like Joseph, we will rise to the places we are meant to be, with God's guidance leading the way.